The message arrived at the Galactic Council chamber on the fourth rotation of the siege. It was not expected. It was not wanted. And yet, High Chancellor Vorith stood before the assembled representatives of 47 species, holding a data crystal that glowed faintly in his six-fingered hand, and knew that desperation had finally consumed reason. "They answered," he said. The chamber fell silent. Even the Clithera, whose respiratory systems produced a constant whistling hum, seemed to hold their breath. Counselor Zafina of the Erythian Collective leaned forward, her silver eyes wide with disbelief. "The humans?" she whispered. Vorith nodded slowly. His twin hearts beat unevenly, a biological response to stress his species had not evolved to suppress. "Yes. The transmission we sent into the quarantine veil 13 cycles ago. They have responded." A wave of murmurs rolled through the chamber. Some voices carried relief. Others carried horror. Humans. For 10,000 standard years, the species called Homo sapiens had been sealed behind the quarantine veil, their solar system wrapped in a network of warning beacons and gravitational inhibitors that prevented faster-than-light travel. The Council had placed them there after the first survey, a single reconnaissance mission that had returned with data so disturbing, so fundamentally incompatible with galactic civilization, that the Council had voted unanimously to isolate Earth forever. The humans were dangerous. Not because of their technology, which had been primitive at the time. Not because of their weapons, which were crude and chemical-based. But because of what they were. Because of how they thought. The survey report had been clear: humans possess no natural armament, no venom, no exoskeleton, no psionic capability. They are physically weak compared to most spacefaring species. However, they exhibit three traits that make them incompatible with galactic society: first, an irrational attachment to individuals outside their genetic line. Second, a willingness to endure extreme personal harm to defend abstract concepts. Third, an alarming tendency to solve problems through creative violence when diplomatic solutions are available. Recommendation: quarantine indefinitely. And so humanity had been left alone, their star system marked with the universal symbol for Forbidden Zone, their radio transmissions monitored but never answered, their existence a shameful secret the Council kept locked away. Until now. Until the Arxhole swarm had come. Vorith activated the data crystal. A holographic display materialized above the chamber floor, showing a human face. It was male, middle-aged by their standards, with dark skin and gray scattered through his short hair. He wore a simple blue uniform with a patch on the shoulder, a circle depicting a planet wrapped in olive branches. The humans spoke in their dominant language, and the chamber's translation matrix rendered his words into Galactic Common. "This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the United Earth Space Command, responding to the distress signal received from the Galactic Council. We understand you are under attack by an extragalactic threat designated the Arxhole Swarm. We understand your defensive fleets have suffered catastrophic losses. We understand you are requesting military assistance." The human paused. His expression was unreadable by most species standards, but Vorith had studied the old survey files. He recognized the tightness around the eyes, the set of the jaw. The human was angry. "You kept us in a cage for 10,000 years, Chen continued. You watched us. You studied us. You never spoke to us. You treated us like animals too dangerous to touch. And now you ask for our help." Counselor Morvac of the Three-Nod Union stood, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. "This is an outrage. How dare they?" "Silence," Vorith commanded. His voice echoed through the chamber with an authority born of desperation. "Let it play." The hologram continued. Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke again, his tone had changed. It was softer. Sadder. "Here's what you need to understand about humans," he said. "We don't forgive easily. We don't forget. But we also don't let people die when we can stop it. Not even people who locked us away and pretended we didn't exist." He straightened, and his expression hardened into something that made Voritha's scales prickle with instinctive alarm. The Third Fleet is already en route to your position. ETA 72 hours. We're bringing everything we have. And when we arrive, you're going to see exactly why you were so afraid of us. The transmission ended. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some counselors shouted in protest. Others demanded immediate defensive preparations. A few simply sat in stunned silence. Vorith let them argue. He was staring at the empty space where the hologram had been, replaying the human's final words in his mind. You're going to see exactly why you were so afraid of us. Counselor Zafina approached him, her elegant features drawn with worry. High Chancellor, what have we done? If the humans arrive with hostile intent. They won't, Vorith interrupted quietly. How can you be certain? Because, Vorith said, turning to face her, the human said, we don't let people die when we can stop it. Not allies. Not friends. People. Despite everything we've done to them, they still consider us people. Zafina's silver eyes widened. You think they're actually coming to help? Vorith looked out through the chamber's observation dome at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the Arxel swarm continued its relentless advance, consuming colonies, stripping worlds, leaving nothing but lifeless rock in its wake. The Council's fleets had been shattered. Their defenses were crumbling. Hope had died 3 rotations ago. Until a human had looked into a camera and promised violence on their behalf. I think, Vorith said slowly, we are about to discover what happens when you cage a species that defines itself by protecting others. Even strangers. Even enemies. He turned back to the council. Prepare all remaining defense stations for the arrival of the human fleet. And someone find me everything we have on human military doctrine. If they're coming to fight beside us, we need to understand how they wage war. Counselor Morvac scoffed. They've been isolated for 10 millennia. What could primitives possibly? They weren't primitive when we sealed them away, Vorith cut him off. They were already reaching for the stars with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. They had fought global wars and survived. They had built weapons capable of destroying their own world and chose not to use them. What do you think 10,000 years of isolation has taught them, Morvac? What do you think they've been building while we pretended they didn't exist? The crystalline counselor fell silent. Vorith touched a control panel on his wrist. Open a channel. Wideband, all military frequencies. A calm officer's voice responded. Channel open, High Chancellor. Vorith took a breath. His next words would be recorded, analyzed, remembered. But they needed to be said. Attention all Council Defense Forces. This is High Chancellor Vorith. I am hereby issuing a fleet-wide directive. When the human forces arrive, you will treat them as honored allies. You will integrate with their command structure. You will follow their tactical recommendations. We ask for their help. They are giving it despite having every reason to refuse. We will not dishonor their sacrifice with pride or prejudice. Vorith out. He closed the channel and turned to face the council one last time. 72 hours, he said. That's how long we have to hold the line. After that, we'll discover if we were right to fear them, or if we should have been grateful they existed at all. High above the chamber, through the dome's transparent surface, a star flickered and died as the Arxel swarm consumed another system. The clock was ticking. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity was coming. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel exactly 71 hours and 43 minutes after Admiral Chen's transmission. They did not arrive quietly. Vorith stood on the command deck of the Council's primary defensive station, watching the tactical display as reality itself seemed to tear open. Massive spatial distortions bloomed across the sensor grid like flowers made of broken physics. Then the ships emerged. Counselor Zafina gasped beside him. By the ancestors! The human Third Fleet numbered 247 vessels. They ranged from sleek corvettes barely larger than atmospheric shuttles to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the Council had ever constructed. But it wasn't their size that made Voritha's twin hearts skip in synchronized fear. It was their design. Council ships were elegant, curved, built with aesthetics in mind because warfare had been a rare occurrence for the last 6,000 years. Human ships looked like they had been born in combat and had never stopped evolving. Angular hulls covered in armor plating. Weapon batteries bristling from every surface. Point defense systems that rotated with predatory alertness. No wasted space. No decorative elements. Just pure, distilled lethality. These were ships built by a species that understood violence intimately. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Admiral Chen requests direct link to High Chancellor Vorith. Put him through, Vorith said. The holographic display shimmered, and Admiral Chen appeared. He looked older than in the previous recording, his face lined with exhaustion. Behind him, Vorith could see the bridge of what must be the flagship, humans moving with practiced efficiency, displays showing tactical data, the quiet intensity of professionals at work. High Chancellor, Chen said. His tone was businesslike, almost curt. Third Fleet is in position. We've analyzed the swarm's advancement pattern and identified their primary hive cluster. It's consuming the Keldrathi system, approximately 40 light-years from your position. Vorith pulled up the same data on his own display. The Keldrathi system had been home to 4 billion souls 3 rotations ago. Now it was a feeding ground. We know, Vorith said quietly. We've been unable to mount an effective defense. The swarm's ships regenerate faster than we can destroy them. Their tactics adapt within minutes of engagement. We've lost 17 fleet groups, Chen interrupted. 463 capital ships. Estimated 2 million personnel. We read your tactical logs on the way here. The humans' bluntness should have been offensive. Instead, Vorith found it strangely comforting. No pretense. No diplomatic dancing. Just facts. Yes, Vorith confirmed. Every strategy we've attempted has failed. The swarm learns too quickly. They absorb our weapons, adapt to our tactics. He paused, the admission bitter on his tongue. We're losing. Chen nodded slowly. You've been fighting them like you fight each other. Formal tactics. Predictable maneuvers. Rules of engagement. There are conventions of warfare that. The swarm doesn't care about your conventions, Chen said, cutting him off again. They're not a civilization. They're a force of nature with teeth. You can't negotiate with a hurricane, Chancellor. You can only break it or be broken by it. Vorith felt his scales prickle. And you believe you can break them? For the first time, something like a smile crossed Admiral Chen's face. It was not a comforting expression. Humans have been breaking things since we discovered fire, he said. It's what we're good at. Now, here's what's going to happen. We're going to hit the hive cluster at Keldrathi with everything we have. Not to destroy it, we can't, not yet. But to get their attention. To make them angry. And when they come after us with everything they've got, you're going to see how humans fight when we stop pretending to be civilized. Zafina stepped forward, her voice tight with concern. Admiral, that's suicide. If you provoke them, they'll focus on us instead of your colonies, Chen finished. That's the point. We draw them out. We make them chase us. And we lead them into the grinder. Vorith stared at the human, understanding dawning with cold clarity. You're using yourselves as bait. We're using ourselves as the hammer, Chen corrected. Your fleets will be the anvil. We're sending you our tactical protocols now. Study them. Share them with your commanders. And when the swarm comes screaming out of Keldrathi, be ready to do things you've never done before. Things that will seem brutal. Inefficient. Wrong. The Admiral leaned forward, and his expression hardened into something ancient and terrible. War isn't about honor, Chancellor. It's about winning. And we've had 10,000 years alone to perfect the art of winning ugly. The transmission ended. Vorith stood in silence, staring at the empty hologram. Around him, his staff processed the incoming tactical data, their expressions ranging from confusion to horror as they parsed what the humans were proposing. High Chancellor, his tactical officer said, her voice shaking slightly. These protocols, they're suggesting we target the swarm's damaged vessels specifically. To prevent regeneration. That we focus fire on crippled ships rather than fresh threats. It violates every principle of honorable combat, Morvac said, appearing on the command deck with several other counselors. To strike at wounded enemies. The swarm has no wounded, Vorith interrupted, his voice cold. They have damaged units that regenerate and return to combat within hours. The humans are right. We've been fighting with one hand tied behind our backs because we couldn't imagine a war without rules. He pulled up the human tactical doctrine on the main display. It was brutal in its efficiency. Overwhelming force concentrated on single points. Feigned retreats to draw enemy formations into kill zones. Targeted strikes on logistics and regeneration centers rather than direct fleet engagement. Scorched earth protocols if a position became untenable. It was everything the Council had spent 6,000 years of peace trying to forget. And it was exactly what they needed. Transmit these protocols to all surviving fleet commanders, Vorith ordered. Tell them we're adopting human tactical doctrine immediately. And tell them, he paused, choosing his words carefully, tell them that the humans are about to show us what it means to fight like you're already dead and decided to take the enemy with you. 40 minutes later, the human fleet moved. They didn't advance cautiously. They didn't probe the swarm's defenses. They simply accelerated to maximum velocity and crashed into the Keldrathi system like a meteor swarm made of weapons and fury. Vorith watched the battle unfold through the tactical feed, and what he witnessed would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The swarm met them with thousands of bioships, living vessels covered in chitinous armor, firing organic weapons that could dissolve shields and corrupt ship systems. The Council's fleets had been overwhelmed by the sheer adaptability of these creatures. They learned. They evolved. They turned every weapon used against them into a strength. The humans didn't care. Their opening salvo was nuclear. Not antimatter, which the swarm had learned to deflect. Not plasma, which they could absorb. Simple, primitive fusion warheads, hundreds of them, launched simultaneously, each one targeted at a different bioship. The swarm's organic shields were designed for energy weapons. The nuclear detonations were kinetic events wrapped in radiation and heat. The bioships couldn't adapt fast enough. 37 swarm vessels simply ceased to exist in the first 10 seconds. But the humans weren't done. While the swarm reeled from the nuclear assault, human corvettes, small, fast, suicidal, dove into the enemy formation. They didn't fire weapons. They rammed. Their hulls were packed with antimatter charges set on deadman triggers. Each corvette that made contact with a bioship became a miniature supernova. They changed tactics. The nuclear assault stopped. The ramming corvettes pulled back. Instead, the human dreadnoughts opened up with weapons the Council had never seen, railguns firing projectiles at relativistic speeds, energy lances that punched through shields like they weren't there, and something the humans called Hellfire missiles, that didn't just destroy ships but set space itself burning with some kind of chemical reaction that couldn't exist in vacuum but somehow did anyway. The swarm tried to adapt. But every time they countered one tactic, the humans switched to another. There was no pattern. No doctrine. Just constant, creative violence delivered with mechanical precision. Vorith understood then. The humans weren't fighting to win this battle. They were teaching the swarm that adaptation meant nothing against an enemy that refused to be predictable. They were teaching the swarm to fear. High Chancellor, his censor officer said, voice tight with alarm. The swarm is disengaging from Keldrathi. The entire hive cluster is moving. Where? Vorith demanded. The officer's hands shook as she highlighted the trajectory on the display. Toward the human fleet. All of them. Every ship in the system. Voritha's blood went cold. How many? 4,362 bioships. They're abandoning the planet. The humans have made them angry enough to stop feeding and start hunting. On the display, Admiral Chen's flagship broadcast a single message to all Council forces, anvil positions. Now. Vorith realized what was happening. The humans had provoked the swarm into pursuing them. And now they were going to lead that entire hive cluster directly into the teeth of the Council's remaining defensive fleets. They were going to turn the swarm's aggression into its own destruction. All ships, Vorith commanded, his voice carrying across every frequency. Assume anvil positions per human tactical doctrine. Prepare for swarm contact in 30 minutes. And may the ancestors forgive us for what we're about to do. He watched the human fleet begin their fighting retreat, drawing 4,000 swarm bioships away from Keldrathi, away from easy prey, toward a killing field of humanity's design. On the flagship's bridge, Admiral Chen stood calmly, watching the swarm pursue, and Vorith finally understood the old survey report. Humans weren't dangerous because they were violent. They were dangerous because they turned violence into art, adapted it into science, and deployed it with the cold precision of mathematics. They were dangerous because they had spent 10,000 years alone, preparing for the day someone would need them to be monsters. And that day had finally come. The killing field was a graveyard waiting to be filled. Vorith watched from the command deck as the human fleet led the swarm directly into the trap. The Council's remaining forces, 93 capital ships, 212 frigates, and countless support craft, had positioned themselves in a spherical formation around a dense asteroid cluster. The humans had chosen the location with surgical precision, enough debris to interfere with the swarm's sensors, enough gravity wells to limit maneuverability, and enough open space to create overlapping fields of fire. It was, Vorith realized, a perfect ambush. If it worked. If it didn't, the Council would lose every remaining military asset in a single engagement, and the swarm would have an unobstructed path to the core worlds. Human fleet entering the kill zone, the tactical officer announced. Swarm bioships in pursuit. Count is, 4,791. The number had grown. The swarm had pulled reinforcements from neighboring systems, so enraged by the human assault that it had abandoned strategic positioning for pure vengeance. Exactly as Admiral Chen had predicted. The human ship streaked through the asteroid field at velocities that should have been suicidal, their point defense systems shredding any debris that came too close. Behind them, the swarm followed like a living tsunami, their bioships pulsing with bioluminescent rage, organic weapons charging with visible energy. They're not slowing down, Counselor Zafina said, her voice tight. The humans aren't slowing down. She was right. The human fleet maintained maximum acceleration, racing deeper into the asteroid cluster, and the swarm followed with single-minded fury, their formation growing more chaotic as bloodlust overrode tactical discipline. Voritha's communicator chimed. Admiral Chen's voice was calm, almost casual. Chancellor, on my mark, all Council ships will activate targeting systems simultaneously. Not before. The swarm can detect active sensors, we need them blind until the moment we spring the trap. Understood, Vorith replied. Admiral, your fleet is running out of space. If you don't decelerate. We're not going to decelerate, Chen interrupted. We're going to do something the swarm won't expect. Trust me, Chancellor. And tell your crews to aim for the damaged ships first. The ones we've already hurt. Don't let them regenerate. The transmission ended. Vorith looked at Zafina. She looked back, her silver eyes wide with barely contained fear. Around them, the command staff worked in tense silence, hands hovering over controls, waiting for the order that would decide the fate of galactic civilization. On the tactical display, the human fleet reached the center of the kill zone. And then they did something impossible. Every human ship fired maneuvering thrusters simultaneously, not to slow down, but to spin. The entire fleet rotated 180 degrees while maintaining forward velocity, a maneuver that should have torn the ships apart from the rotational stress. Instead, they completed the flip in perfect synchronization and opened fire while flying backward. The swarm bioships, still pursuing at maximum velocity, flew directly into a wall of weapons fire. Railgun slugs traveling at relativistic speeds. Energy lances hot enough to vaporize metal. Missile swarms that turned space into a storm of explosions. The humans weren't retreating anymore, they were converting their escape into a fighting retreat, and the swarm had no time to adapt. 200 bioships died in the first 5 seconds. Mark. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos. All ships, activate targeting systems. Fire at will. Vorith commanded. The Council fleet lit up the asteroid field with active sensors, and suddenly the swarm found itself surrounded. Every direction was a firing solution. Every angle was covered. The bioships tried to scatter, tried to reform, but the humans had driven them into a confined space where their numbers became a disadvantage. Vorith watched as his crews, species who had spent generations avoiding conflict, followed the human tactical doctrine with grim determination. They didn't target the fresh ships. They targeted the wounded ones. The bioships that had been damaged in the initial engagement with the human fleet, that were still regenerating, still vulnerable. It violated every principle of honorable warfare. It was brutally, horrifyingly effective. Bioships that might have recovered and rejoined the fight were destroyed before their organic healing could complete. The swarm's greatest advantage, its ability to regenerate and adapt, was being systematically stripped away by an enemy that refused to fight fair. And the humans pressed the attack without mercy. A squadron of human destroyers dove into the thickest concentration of bioships, shields blazing, weapons firing on full automatic. They didn't try to survive, they were there to create chaos, to disrupt formations, to make the swarm react emotionally instead of tactically. 3 destroyers were torn apart by concentrated fire. But in dying, they created an opening. The human dreadnoughts exploited it instantly, their main cannons firing in sequence, each shot precisely calculated to hit bioships that were already damaged, already struggling. The swarm tried to counter, tried to focus fire on the dreadnoughts, but the Council ships provided covering fire, their crews learning, adapting, finding courage they didn't know they possessed. Swarm attempting to break through Sector 7, the tactical officer reported. Human corvette wing is intercepting, another voice added. Vorith watched as 18 human corvettes, small, fast, fragile, threw themselves at the breakthrough attempt. They didn't have the firepower to stop the bioships. But they had speed, and they had pilots who understood that sometimes the greatest weapon was simply being in the way. The corvettes wove through the bioship formation like dancers, firing, dodging, drawing fire away from the Council vessels. 12 of them were destroyed. But the remaining 6 bought enough time for a Council battlegroup to rotate their firing solutions and obliterate the breakthrough attempt. Humans were dying to save aliens they'd never met. Aliens who had imprisoned their entire species for 10,000 years. Vorith felt something break inside him, not despair, but shame so profound it was almost physical. High Chancellor, Zafina said quietly, watching the same tactical data. They're not fighting for victory. They're fighting for us. I know, Vorith whispered. On the display, Admiral Chen's flagship, a massive dreadnought called Defiant, moved to the center of the formation. Its weapon batteries were glowing white-hot from sustained fire. Its shields were flickering, nearly depleted. But it didn't retreat. It simply rotated to present a fresh shield facing and kept firing. The swarm, driven by rage and instinct, concentrated their remaining forces on the Defiant. Over 1,000 bioships converged on the flagship, their organic weapons tearing at its shields like claws trying to reach flesh. The flagship is being overwhelmed, the sensor officer said, her voice breaking. Admiral Chen is exactly where he wants to be, Vorith interrupted, suddenly understanding. He's drawing them in. He's making them focus everything on him. And while the swarm concentrated on the Defiant, the rest of the human fleet and the Council ships carved through the bioship formations like surgical instruments. There was no honor in what they were doing. No glory. Just systematic, efficient slaughter. The Defiant's shields failed. Bioships swarmed the dreadnought, their weapons scoring deep wounds in its armor. Atmosphere vented from dozens of breaches. Entire sections went dark. Admiral Chen, your ship is, Vorith began. Right where I needed to be, Chen's voice came through, calm despite the sound of alarms and explosions in the background. All Council ships, pull back 3,000 kilometers and prepare for heavy flash. Repeat, pull back now. Vorith didn't hesitate. All ships, emergency retrograde, maximum thrust. The Council fleet disengaged, burning their engines at dangerous levels to create distance. The human fleet scattered in perfect coordination, opening gaps in their formation. Only the Defiant remained in the center, surrounded by over 1,000 swarm bioships. Admiral, what are you? Vorith started. The Defiant exploded. But it wasn't a death. It was a detonation. The Dreadnought's antimatter reactor didn't fail, it was deliberately overloaded, turned into a weapon of last resort. The explosion was so bright it temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. When the flash cleared, there was nothing left of the center of the swarm formation. No bioships. No debris. Just empty space scoured clean by matter-antimatter annihilation. 1,500 swarm bioships ceased to exist in an instant. Vorith stared at the tactical display, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. An admiral had deliberately sacrificed his flagship and Defiant's crew pods are clear, the sensor officer said suddenly. Emergency evacuation successful. Admiral Chen he's alive. They evacuated before the reactor went critical. The human fleet was already moving, exploiting the massive gap in the swarm's formation. Without leadership, without cohesion, the remaining bioships tried to scatter. But there was nowhere to run. The kill zone had become a tomb. It took another 43 minutes to finish the job. When the last bioship was destroyed, Vorith stood in silence, looking at the casualty reports. The Council had lost 29 ships. The humans had lost 74, including their flagship. But the swarm's hive cluster at Keldrothi was broken. 4,791 bioships reduced to debris and radiation. The greatest threat the galaxy had faced in recorded history had been shattered in a single engagement. By a species the Council had locked away because they were too dangerous to speak to. 3 rotations later, Vorith stood in the Council chamber once more. But this time, he wasn't alone. Admiral Marcus Chen stood beside him, wearing a fresh uniform, looking tired but unbowed. Behind him, representatives from Earth's government had arrived, diplomats, scientists, military officers. Humans, finally allowed to take their place among the stars. The Council members watched them with expressions ranging from awe to fear to shame. Vorith stepped forward. 10,000 years ago, he said, his voice echoing through the chamber, this Council made a decision. We isolated humanity because we feared what they represented. We feared their violence, their unpredictability, their refusal to accept the natural order of things. We told ourselves it was for the good of galactic civilization. He paused, looking at Chen. We were wrong. The words hung in the air like a confession. We were wrong because we mistook capacity for intent. We saw that humans could be violent and assumed they would be. We saw that they refused to accept suffering as inevitable and called it dangerous. We forgot that the same species that can create terrible weapons can also choose never to use them. That the same people who understand violence intimately can also choose mercy. Vorith turned to face the Council. The swarm would have destroyed us. Every species in this chamber would have been consumed. Our civilizations, our cultures, our children, all of it would have been lost. And the humans, who had every reason to leave us to our fate, came anyway. They fought for us. They bled for us. They died for us. He looked back at Chen. The quarantine veil is being dismantled as we speak. Humanity will take its rightful place as a member of the Galactic Council. Not as subordinates. Not as probationary members. As equals. As the species that reminded us what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. Admiral Chen stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was measured, diplomatic, but there was steel underneath. We didn't come here for gratitude, he said. We came because it was the right thing to do. Because we're not the monsters you imagined us to be. We're just people who refuse to let others suffer when we can stop it. That's not going to change now that we're out of quarantine. He paused, and a slight smile crossed his face. But we do have some conditions for joining your council. Vorith had expected this. Name them. First, the full survey files on humanity, all of them, are to be released publicly. No more secrets. No more surveillance. We deserve to know exactly what you thought of us. Agreed, Vorith said without hesitation. Second, human military doctrine is to be integrated into Council defense forces. Not because we want control, but because the swarm is still out there. This was one hive cluster. Intelligence suggests there are more. You need to learn how to fight like you mean it. Counselor Morvac stood, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light. That would fundamentally change the nature of galactic civilization. We have maintained peace for 6,000 years by never facing a real threat, Chen interrupted. Peace through isolation isn't peace. It's just delayed conflict. The galaxy is a dangerous place. You forgot that because you had the luxury of forgetting. We never did. Vorith nodded slowly. What else? Third, Chen said, his expression growing serious, you establish formal first contact protocols for any newly discovered species. No more quarantines based on fear. No more isolation because someone doesn't fit your definition of civilized. You evaluate, you communicate, and you treat them with the same respect you'd want for yourselves. The chamber fell silent. You're asking us to fundamentally change how we approach the unknown, Counselor Zafina said. I'm asking you to learn from your mistakes, Chen replied. You locked us away for 10,000 years because you were afraid. Don't do that to someone else. Vorith looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of 47 species, each processing what the human was saying. Some looked resistant. Others looked thoughtful. But none could deny that humanity had earned the right to make demands. The council will vote, Vorith said formally. All in favor of accepting humanity's conditions and granting full membership status. The vote was unanimous. Chen extended his hand, a human gesture. Vorith had studied the files enough to know it meant agreement, trust, partnership. He extended his own six-fingered hand and grasped the admiral's. Welcome to the Galactic Council, Admiral Chen, Vorith said. And thank you. For everything. Chen smiled, genuine this time. Just don't lock anybody else in a cage, Chancellor. You might need them someday. Later, as the human delegation prepared to return to their ships, Vorith stood at the observation dome, watching Earth's fleet prepare for departure. Zafina joined him. Do you think we did the right thing? She asked quietly. Bringing them into the fold. Vorith thought about the battle at Keldrathi. About the corvettes that had sacrificed themselves. About the Defiant's final stand. About a species that had spent 10,000 years alone and had emerged not broken, not bitter, but ready to stand for strangers. I think, he said slowly, we should have done it 10,000 years ago. And I think the galaxy is going to be a very different place with humans in it. Different how? Vorith watched a human destroyer pass by the station, its hull still scarred from combat, its crew already preparing for the next crisis, the next call for help, the next impossible fight they'd take on anyway. Louder, he said finally. More chaotic. More dangerous. He smiled, an expression his species rarely wore. And much, much safer.